I've got to tell you, I think today is one wonderful day. I don't know about y'all, but for me, spring is actually here. Now I'm not stupid. We're probably going to get a few cold days, but I think I'm pretty safe in saying that most of the snow and the ice are over at least for another, about 8 months? And in just 3 weeks, we're going to be celebrating Easter. And even though I know that signifies all kinds of really important stuff, it also means we've got only a couple of weeks to go in this series we started back in February, when it was cold and gray and icy. And during the last 3 weeks, we've used the book of Job to look at some of life's more challenging questions. For example, in the first week, we talked about the question, why do bad things happen to good people? And we looked at how when we accept that we've been cleansed and that in the future we're going to be saved and that right now God is with us, we can sort of live with the questions even when the reasons aren't all that clear. Now, that's what we did during week 1. And then in the second message, we talked about the question, why don't people understand me? Now, that's a good one. And we kind of came to the conclusion that for whatever reason, some folks either can't or won't understand what we're going through. But there are others. I'm telling you, there are others, and I'm talking about good, sincere people who can identify with what we're facing and who will be willing to face it with us. Now, that was week 2. And then last week, we talked about the question, why don't I understand what's going on? And as we discussed, that may be easy to understand, my lack of understanding. The minute I accept my limits and broaden my vision and, of course, trust my God. Now, that's what we've covered to this point. And this morning, we're going to focus on another question that I think can cause a few, tosses and turns. And I'm talking about the question, why is God allowing this to happen? And I'll tell you, even though it's not written on the front of the bulletin, I really think you could add the words, to me, at the end. In other words, why is God allowing this to happen to me? And, according to the book of Job, this is really the question Job had from the middle of the book right to the end. And, when you think about it, when you consider everything that happened to him, why shouldn't he? I mean, we know that even though Job was he was a righteous man, there was nobody better than Job, God allowed Satan to hammer him with all kinds of stuff that he really didn't deserve. And when Job said he was innocent, his friends assumed that he was a liar and that he was hiding something because they were 100% sure that a God of love and a God of justice wouldn't allow a truly good and righteous person to suffer. That wasn't going to happen. Man, that would mean God is violating his own rules. And even though both Job and the reader know that's exactly what happened, Job's friends didn't know that, nor did Job. And although it would have been easy for Job just to surrender his integrity, and to say that he had done something he knew he hadn't, or to turn his back on both his friends and his God, Job didn't do that. Instead, faced with all the nonsense he had to deal with in his life, stuff that wasn't deserved, he simply turned his face towards God and in essence asked, why? Why are you allowing this to happen to me? And I'll tell you, that's something we see not only in the chapter I gave you there in your bulletin, but throughout the last half of the book. You see, as Job went through all his suffering and all his problems and all his pain, stuff that he knew wasn't right or deserved, he became discouraged. And as he listened to his good and loyal friends tell him that he was both a hypocrite and a liar, he became frustrated. And as he compared the rules he had followed his entire life, that God blesses the righteous and punishes the wicked, it's as easy and as clear as that, all this made him more and more confused. And so he simply wanted God to come down and explain how all this was justified. For God to explain how he could allow this kind of, injustice to happen. And I'll tell you, I think that's the sort of question a lot of very dedicated and sincere believers end up asking, either silently to themselves or they express it out loud, especially when things happen that are unexpected and don't seem fair. You see, after spending some time maybe thinking about the nature of suffering, and after enduring comments of people who either don't understand or frankly don't care, and after trying to make sense of it all themselves, a lot of these discouraged and frustrated and confused Christians turn their attention right to God himself and expect him to offer an answer that's better than the mess they've gotten from others or they've come up with themselves. You know, something that might actually make sense of the tragedy or the accident or the disaster that really doesn't make sense. Not in a physical world that's supposed to be governed by rational laws, or a spiritual universe that's supposed to be controlled by a loving and just God. As a matter of fact, I think this kind of thing can actually make folks who believe God really is in the business of protecting his children, it can make them become so discouraged and so frustrated and so confused that they end up asking that $64 question, why is God allowing this to happen? And even though hearing this kind of thing come out of our mouths may cause some Christians to kind of cringe because, we're not supposed to get mad at God. We're never supposed to blame God for anything. I think there are three pretty important things to remember when we feel like asking the question. For example, I think we need to recognize that we're probably not going to get any kind of answer that really satisfies us. Now, I said probably because it's a bad idea to use words like never. I mean, there may be an example of a person getting an answer that explains it all. I'm just saying we probably shouldn't hold our breath waiting for it to happen. And I think the reason that the kind of answers we want are so few and far between, well, I think the reason is kind of obvious. You see, it comes down to the simple fact that God is God and we're not. Like we talked about last week, while God is absolutely free, man, our entire lives are defined by limits. And I'm talking about limited power, limited knowledge, limited space, limited time, even limited love. We are creatures. We are not the creator. And so we're probably never going to understand why our teacher gave us that pop quiz back in 1984. Or a company laid off middle management back in 2005, or a hamster got sick last week. That's probably not going to happen. We're not going to understand that. And I'll tell you, that's really what Job encountered when God finally did do what Job asked him to do. You realize that happened? Job wanted God to explain himself. That's exactly what God did. God came right before him. But instead of giving him the kind of answer that Job expected, from a storm, the Lord and Creator of the universe said this to Job. He said, face me and answer the questions I ask. Are you trying to prove that you are innocent by accusing me of injustice? You have a powerful arm and a thundering voice to compare with mine? If so, then surround yourself with glory and majesty. And then God rattled off all the things that he had done and could do that Job hadn't and couldn't. You see, when we ask this question, we're probably not going to get the kind of answer we want. That's one thing to recognize. And second, I think we also need to recognize that just by asking the question, just by thinking about asking the question, we're actually making a pretty profound statement of faith. A pretty profound statement of how we see ourselves in relationship to God. I remember years ago when I was working for a church in Montana, a woman who was obviously upset told me that while she was out on vacation, her best friend suddenly died unexpectedly. Now, you got to understand, they'd been friends from elementary school. They lived in the same small town. While she was gone, her friend died. And when she told another friend that she was angry at God for letting this happen, she was told she should never, ever be angry with God. He had nothing to do with the death of her friend. Now, that's what she told me. And I got to tell you, I can't disagree more. When that sort of thing happens, when a friend dies unexpectedly, I think being angry with God is something that every person of faith probably needs to do. I mean, that's certainly what we see in the Psalms. I mean, just listen to this from the 13th Psalm. How much longer, Lord, will you forget about me? Will it be forever? How long will you hide? How long must I be confused and miserable all day? How long will my enemies keep beating me down? Now, this is what the psalmist said right there in the Bible. Or this from Psalm 42. You are my mighty rock. Sounds pretty good, right? Why have you forgotten me? Why must enemies mistreat me and make me sad? Even my bones are in pain, while all day long my enemies sneer and ask, where is your God? Now, these are people of incredible faith making these statements. No, when we offer this kind of prayer to God, we are not questioning his authority. Rather, we're recognizing it. We're acknowledging it. We're affirming it. You see, we're acknowledging that God really is in control, even in control in situations we don't understand or we don't like. I mean, we're accepting that when Jesus said God makes the sun rise on the good and bad people, he sends rain for the ones who do right and for the ones who do wrong, he knew what he was talking about. When we look to God for an explanation, we're saying that he is able to give it because he's the one in control. And I'll tell you something else. I think asking that question also shows that we feel close enough to God that we can express to him not just our hopes and dreams, but also our fears and frustrations without losing his love. You see, I think asking the question actually shows faith, and that's something else we need to recognize. And third, after we ask the question, that's the time we need to make the decision to trust God and his love. And you know, that's exactly what happened to Job when after hearing from God, he said, no one can oppose you because you have the power to do what you want. You asked why I talk so much when I know so little. I have talked about things that are beyond my understanding. And as to the Psalms, listen to how the 13th Psalm ends. Remember, he was all fired up about God not helping him. This is what he says at the end. I trust your love. I feel like celebrating because you rescued me. You have been good to me. Lord, I will sing about you. And according to the psalmist in Psalm 42, why am I discouraged? Why am I restless? I trust you, and I will praise you again because you help me and you are my God. Now, we've talked about this before. You know how faith is always a decision to step into a dark room, trusting that there's a floor on the other side of the door. A decision to accept that God not only loves us, but holds our destiny in his hands. You see, it's a decision to trust that despite what we might see or even feel, God has cleansed us and God is leading us into a glorious future. And God is with us right here, right now, in the middle of the problems and the pain we're facing. You see, after we ask God why, that's when it's important to trust. You see, regardless of the time of year, I think most of us will be in situations that cause us to feel discouraged and frustrated and confused. And at those times, regardless of what we hear coming from the outside or thinking about on the inside, we could very well be in the same position as Job. And when we, like him, ask God why he's allowing this to happen, I think it's important for us to recognize that we may not get the answer we want, but also that asking the question reflects our own faith. And finally, after the question is asked, then we need to decide whether or not we're going to trust God. Something that may shift our focus from the troubles we're facing to the one who holds our future in his hands. Amen.